While you imagine the worst-case scenarios, your mind can turn a small unanswered text into a breakup, a minor headache into a serious illness, or one mistake into a complete disaster. Before anything even happens, your brain is already writing the ending, and it's usually the worst one possible. The exhausting part is that you know you're overthinking, yet the fear still feels real. Your brain is trying to protect you. When you constantly imagine worst-case scenarios, it can feel like your mind is working against you. A delayed response becomes rejection. A small mistake feels like failure. One uncertain moment quickly turns into a disaster in your head, before reality even has a chance to unfold. But beneath all the overthinking and fear, your brain is usually trying to do one thing: protect you. The human brain is designed for survival. Long before modern life existed, people survived by staying alert to danger. The brain learned to scan for threats, prepare for problems, and avoid situations that could lead to pain or harm. Even though most people today not running from physical danger every day, the brain still reacts, as if emotional pain is a threat that must be avoided at all costs. Rejection, embarrassment, failure, abandonment, or uncertainty can trigger the same alarm system inside the mind. This is why your thoughts often race toward the worst possible outcome. Your brain believes that if it prepares you for pain ahead of time, the pain will hurt less. It convinces you that expecting disappointment is safer than being surprised by it. In a strange way, overthinking becomes emotional armor. If you imagine every possible disaster, maybe nothing can catch you off guard. The problem is that this protection often creates suffering before anything has even happened. Your body reacts to imagined danger as though it is real. Your heart races, your stomach tightens, and your mind spirals deeper into fear. You start trying to solve problems that do not exist yet. Instead of living in the present moment, you live in possibilities, predictions, and fears about the future. For many people, this pattern develops after painful experiences. If you have been hurt, betrayed, embarrassed, or blindsided in the past, your brain remembers that pain. It begins searching for signs that it could happen again. Even when situations are different, your mind reacts as though it is trying to stop history from repeating itself. What looks like negativity on the surface is often self-protection underneath. The difficult part is that the brain cannot always tell the difference between protecting you and trapping you. Constant fear may feel safer than hope. Expecting failure may feel safer than taking risks. Preparing for rejection may feel safer than trusting people. But over time, living in survival mode can keep you from experiencing peace, connection, and growth. Learning to challenge worst-case thinking does not mean ignoring reality or pretending bad things never happen. It means recognizing that fear is not always truth. Your thoughts are attempts to protect you, but they are not predictions of the future. Sometimes the safest thing you can do is stop treating every uncertain moment like a catastrophe waiting to happen. Your brain is trying to protect you the best way it knows how. But healing begins when you realize you do not have to believe every fearful story your mind creates. Anxiety makes uncertainty feel dangerous. Uncertainty is a normal part of life. Yet for someone struggling with anxiety, uncertainty rarely feels neutral. It feels threatening. A simple maybe can quickly turn into fear, overthinking, and emotional exhaustion. When the future is unclear, the anxious mind often assumes the worst because uncertainty itself feels unsafe. Most people can tolerate not knowing every outcome. They may feel nervous waiting for an answer, facing change, or stepping into something unfamiliar, but they can still function without immediately expecting disaster. Anxiety works differently. It treats uncertainty like danger. Instead of saying, "I'll deal with whatever happens," the anxious mind says, "What if something terrible happens and I'm not prepared for it?" This fear of the unknown creates a constant need for certainty and control. You may replay conversations repeatedly, search for reassurance from others, or overanalyze small details trying to predict what will happen next. An unanswered text message becomes proof that someone is upset with you. A change in plans feels like something is going wrong. Even positive opportunities can trigger anxiety because they involve unfamiliar outcomes that cannot be fully controlled. The difficult part is that uncertainty exists everywhere. No relationship comes with guarantees. No decision comes with complete certainty. No future can be perfectly predicted. Anxiety struggles to accept this reality, so it tries to fill in the blanks itself. Unfortunately, it often fills those blanks with fear instead of possibility. This is why anxious thoughts can feel so convincing. The brain believes it is helping you stay prepared and protected. If you imagine every worst-case scenario ahead of time, maybe you can avoid pain, embarrassment, rejection, or failure. But instead of creating safety, this habit creates constant emotional tension. You begin living as though danger is always nearby, even during ordinary moments. Over time, anxiety can make uncertainty feel unbearable. Waiting for results, making decisions, entering relationships, or facing change can become mentally exhausting because the brain keeps demanding answers that life cannot provide. The more uncertain something feels, the more the mind searches for control. And when control is impossible, fear grows stronger. One of the hardest but most important lessons in healing anxiety is learning that uncertainty is not the same thing as danger. Not knowing what will happen does not automatically mean something bad will happen. Sometimes uncertainty simply means the future has not unfolded yet. The anxious mind often forgets that there are many possible outcomes, not just negative ones. Learning to tolerate uncertainty takes practice. It means resisting the urge to immediately solve every fear in your head. It means allowing questions to exist without rushing to catastrophic conclusions. Most importantly, it means understanding that discomfort is survivable. You do not need absolute certainty to be okay. Anxiety wants guarantees before you move forward in life. But real growth happens when you continue despite uncertainty. Peace does not come from controlling every outcome. It comes from trusting that you can handle life even when you do not know exactly what happens next. Past experiences shape present fears. Many of the fears people carry today are created from the present moment alone. They are often connected to experiences from the past that left emotional wounds behind. The mind remembers pain, disappointment, rejection, betrayal, and failure far more strongly than it remembers comfort or safety. Because of this, past experiences quietly shape how people see the world, react to uncertainty, and protect themselves from being hurt again. When someone has gone through painful experiences, the brain begins learning patterns. If trust once led to betrayal, the mind may begin associating closeness with danger. If failure once caused humiliation, taking risks may suddenly feel terrifying. If abandonment or rejection happened before, even small signs of distance from others can trigger fear. The brain stores these experiences like warnings, constantly trying to prevent the same pain from happening again. This is why people often react strongly to situations that may not seem threatening on the surface. A delayed response, a change in tone, criticism, or uncertainty can activate old emotional memories without the person even realizing it. The body and mind respond as though the past is happening all over again. What appears to be an overreaction is often unresolved, fear resurfacing beneath the situation. Past pain can also change the way people think about themselves. Repeated criticism may create deep self-doubt. Emotional neglect can lead someone to believe they are unimportant or difficult to love. Betrayal may create constant suspicion in relationships. Over time, these experiences shape inner beliefs that feel true even when circumstances change. People begin expecting pain not because it is guaranteed, but because it has become familiar. One of the hardest things about emotional wounds is that the brain prefers familiarity over uncertainty, even when familiarity is painful. If chaos, disappointment, or fear existed in the past, the mind may unconsciously expect those same outcomes in the future. It becomes easier to imagine rejection than acceptance, failure than success, or abandonment than stability. The brain believes it is staying prepared by expecting the worst. Unfortunately, living this way can create emotional exhaustion. Instead of experiencing the present clearly, people begin viewing life through the lens of old pain. Relationships become difficult because fear constantly searches for warning signs. Opportunities feel risky because failure seems inevitable. Trust becomes harder because the brain keeps trying to protect itself from another emotional injury. Healing begins when people recognize that past experiences influence them but do not have to control them forever. The fears developed in painful moments were often survival responses, created to help protect against further hurt. But not every situation is the same as the past. Not every person will repeat old patterns. Not every risk will end in failure. Understanding this does not erase fear overnight, but it creates awareness. It allows people to separate old wounds from present reality. The goal is not to pretend painful experiences never happened, but to stop allowing those experiences to define every future possibility. The past may explain why certain fears exist, but it does not have to decide what happens next. Growth happens when people slowly learn that protecting themselves from all pain can also prevent them from experiencing trust, connection, healing, and peace. Overthinking creates false evidence. Overthinking often begins with a simple thought, a small worrying, or a moment of uncertainty. But instead of passing naturally, the mind keeps returning to it again and again. The situation gets replayed from every possible angle, analyzed for hidden meanings, and stretched far beyond what actually happened. Over time, these repeated thoughts begin to feel less like possibilities and more like facts. This is how overthinking creates false evidence. The human mind naturally searches for patterns and explanations. When something feels uncertain or emotionally important, the brain tries to solve it by thinking harder about it. At first, this may seem helpful. Reflecting on situations can sometimes lead to understanding or better decisions. However, overthinking crosses the line when thinking stops being productive and starts feeding fear. For example, someone may replay a conversation repeatedly, focusing on a single sentence or change in tone. The more they think about it, the more convinced they become that the other person is upset with them. Even without real proof, the mind begins collecting evidence to support the fear. Suddenly, small details that may mean nothing start feeling significant. A delayed response, short message, or facial expression becomes confirmation that something is wrong. The danger of overthinking is that repetition strengthens belief. Thoughts repeated often begin to feel true simply because they are familiar. The brain confuses emotional intensity with accuracy. If a fear feels strong enough, the mind assumes it must be real. But emotions are not always reliable evidence. Anxiety, insecurity, and fear can distort the way situations are interpreted. Overthinking also creates mental scenarios that have not actually happened. A person may imagine future failures, arguments, embarrassment, or rejection so vividly that the body reacts as though those events are already real. Stress hormones increase, emotions intensify, and fear grows stronger. The mind then points to these emotional reactions as further proof that something bad is about to happen. In reality, the fear was created internally, not by actual events. Another reason overthinking feels convincing is because the brain prefers certainty, even negative certainty, over the discomfort of not knowing. Instead of accepting uncertainty, the mind creates conclusions to fill in the gaps. Unfortunately, those conclusions are often based on fear rather than facts. The more time spent analyzing, the more believable those conclusions become. This cycle can become emotionally exhausting. People who overthink often struggle to trust themselves, trust others, or enjoy the present moment because their minds are constantly searching for hidden problems. They may believe they are being cautious or prepared, but in reality, they are creating stress from imagined interpretations rather than objective truth. Breaking this cycle begins with learning to separate thoughts from facts. Not every fear deserves belief simply because it appears in the mind. Thoughts are mental events, not guarantees of reality. Just because something feels possible does not mean it is probable. Just because a fear feels intense does not mean it is true. Learning to challenge overthinking requires slowing down and asking important questions. What actual evidence supports this fear? Am I assuming the worst without proof? Could there be another explanation? These questions help interrupt the automatic connection between emotion and reality. Overthinking creates false evidence by repeating fear until it feels factual, but clarity comes when people realize that thoughts are not always trustworthy reflections of reality. Sometimes the mind is not revealing truth. It is simply reacting to uncertainty, fear, and the desire to feel in control. you may feel responsible for preventing disaster. For many people who struggle with anxiety and overthinking, worrying does not feel pointless. It feels necessary. Deep down, they may believe that staying alert, thinking ahead, and preparing for every possible problem is what keeps bad things from happening. The mind begins to treat worrying like a responsibility, as though relaxing would somehow invite disaster. This creates a heavy emotional burden where a person feels personally responsible for preventing pain, failure, conflict, or loss before it ever occurs. This mindset often develops from fear and past experiences. If someone has been hurt unexpectedly before, the brain learns to stay hyper-aware in order to avoid being caught off guard again. The mind starts believing that constant vigilance equals safety. Thoughts like "I need to be prepared," "I can't let my guard down," or "if I miss something, everything could fall apart" become deeply ingrained. Worrying becomes less about thinking and more about survival. As a result, the person may constantly analyze situations, anticipate worst-case scenarios, and mentally rehearse how to handle potential problems. They may feel responsible for keeping relationships stable, avoiding mistakes, protecting others from disappointment, or preventing conflict before it begins. Even situations outside their control can start feeling like personal responsibilities. The brain convinces them that if they think hard enough, plan carefully enough, or stay anxious enough, they can stop disaster from happening. The problem is that this creates an impossible standard. No person can control every outcome, predict every problem, or protect themselves from all pain. Life is naturally uncertain, and trying to manage every possibility only leads to emotional exhaustion. Instead of creating safety, constant worrying traps people in a state of tension, where peace feels unfamiliar and stress feels necessary. Over time, this way of thinking can become emotionally addictive. Calmness may even feel uncomfortable, because the mind associates relaxation with vulnerability. When nothing seems wrong, the brain keeps searching for hidden dangers. It believes that staying anxious means staying prepared. Unfortunately, this often prevents people from fully enjoying the present moment because they are too focused on preventing future problems that may never happen. This pressure can also create guilt. If something does go wrong, the person may blame themselves for not thinking ahead enough, not noticing warning signs sooner, or not doing more to stop the outcome. They may carry responsibility for things they never truly had control over. The mind confuses influence with total responsibility, making people believe they must hold everything together at all times. Learning to let go of this burden is difficult, because the brain fears that relaxing means becoming careless. But there is an important difference between healthy awareness and obsessive control. Being thoughtful and prepared is healthy. Believing you must constantly worrying in order to keep disaster away is emotionally damaging. Healing begins when people understand that worrying is not what keeps them safe. Constant fear does not prevent pain, mistakes, or uncertainty. It only forces them to suffer repeatedly in advance. Real peace comes from accepting that not everything can be controlled, and trusting that they are capable of handling life even when unexpected things happen. You are not responsible for preventing every possible disaster. You are not required to carry the weight of every future outcome in your mind at all times. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop treating anxiety like protection and start allowing yourself to experience moments of rest, trust, and emotional freedom. Imagining the worst can become a habit. Imagining the worst-case scenario does not always begin as a conscious choice. Often, it starts as a response to fear, uncertainty, disappointment, or past emotional pain. At first, the mind may only jump to negative outcomes during stressful situations. But over time, if this pattern continues repeatedly, catastrophic thinking can slowly become automatic. The brain learns to expect danger everywhere, turning worst-case thinking into a habit rather than an occasional reaction. The human brain is shaped by repetition. Thoughts that are repeated frequently create stronger mental pathways, making those thoughts easier to return to in the future. This means that every time someone immediately assumes failure, rejection, embarrassment, or disaster, the brain strengthens the habit of expecting negative outcomes. Eventually, the mind no longer pauses to consider multiple possibilities. It automatically searches for the worst one first. This habit can appear in many areas of life. A small mistake at work may instantly feel like losing a career. A delayed text message may feel like abandonment. Minor physical symptoms may trigger fears of serious illness. Even positive opportunities can feel dangerous, because the brain focuses more on what could go wrong than what could go right. The mind becomes conditioned to treat uncertainty as a threat. One reason this pattern becomes so powerful is because the brain mistakes familiarity for safety. Even though catastrophic thinking causes stress, it can still feel strangely comfortable because it is predictable. The mind believes that expecting the worst keeps a person emotionally prepared. If disappointment happens, they think they will suffer less because they saw it coming. Unfortunately, this way of thinking rarely reduces pain. Instead, it creates constant anxiety long before anything has actually happened. Over time, imagining the worst can affect emotions, relationships, decision-making, and self-confidence. People may avoid taking risks because failure feels inevitable. They may struggle to trust others because betrayal feels expected. They may constantly seek reassurance, overanalyze situations, or feel emotionally drained from carrying fear every day. Life starts revolving around preventing imagined disasters instead of experiencing the present moment. Another problem with habitual worst-case thinking is that the brain begins filtering reality through negativity. Positive outcomes may be dismissed as temporary or lucky, while negative possibilities feel more believable. Even when things are going well, the mind may search for hidden problems or prepare for things to fall apart. Peace becomes difficult because the brain has trained itself to stay alert for danger at all times. The good news is that habits can change. Just as the brain learned to expect the worst through repetition, it can also learn healthier patterns over time. This does not mean forcing unrealistic positivity or pretending problems never exist. It means learning to pause before immediately assuming disaster. It means questioning fearful thoughts instead of automatically believing them. Most importantly, it means recognizing that uncertainty does not always lead to negative outcomes. Breaking the habit of catastrophic thinking takes patience, because the brain is used to reacting automatically. At first, challenging those thoughts may feel uncomfortable or unnatural. But every time a person considers a balanced perspective, instead of the worst-case scenario, they begin weakening the old mental pattern and strengthening a healthier one. Imagining the worst may have once felt like protection, but when it becomes a habit, it often creates more suffering than safety. Real peace begins when people stop treating fear as prediction and start allowing themselves to believe that not every unknown situation is a disaster waiting to happen. Imagining the worst-case scenario is often the mind's attempt to create safety in an uncertain world, whether it comes from anxiety, painful past experiences, overthinking, or the need to stay in control. Catastrophic thinking usually begins as a form of self-protection. The brain believes that expecting disappointment, failure, or danger will somehow reduce the pain if those things happen. But instead of creating peace, this habit often creates constant fear, emotional exhaustion, and distance from the present moment. Over time, worst-case thinking can become automatic. The mind learns to focus on threats before possibilities, problems before solutions, and fear before reality. Small situations become overwhelming because the brain immediately jumps to the most negative outcome. What begins as protection slowly turns into a cycle that keeps people trapped in stress, self-doubt, and emotional tension. The important thing to remember is that thoughts are not always facts. Fear can feel convincing without being true. Anxiety can create stories that seem real even when there is little evidence to support them. Just because the mind imagines disaster does not mean disaster is coming. Many of the fears people carry are based on possibilities, not certainties. Breaking this pattern takes awareness and patience. It means learning to question fearful assumptions instead of automatically believing them. It means tolerating uncertainty without rushing to catastrophic conclusions. Most importantly, it means understanding that peace does not come from predicting every bad outcome. Peace comes from trusting yourself to handle life as it unfolds. You cannot control every situation, prevent every disappointment, or guarantee that nothing painful will ever happen. but you can stop allowing fear to define every possibility before it even begins. Healing starts when you realize that your mind may be trying to protect you, but you do not have to live your entire life preparing for disasters that may never happen.